All right, well, let's get started. Thanks, everyone, for listening. It's the Government Sales Momentum podcast, and I am back with Chelsea Meggit. Hey, Chelsea, how are you?
Hey, Ricky, I'm great. How are you?
Good, good. So it's been a while. I know the people that listen all the time, and I get a lot of comments and emails and even mentions and conversations about the episode we did previously on the show. Thought it'd be a good time to, as you know, COVID's kind of, I don't want to say it's going away, but I think we're starting to wrap our arms around it a little bit, and the public's opening up. You know, we were just talking about how conferences are starting to open back up. I thought it'd be a good time to kind of reconnect, talk about what you're doing, talk about where OTAs are right now, maybe getting into maybe some more specific strategies, and then basically anything else you want to talk about that you think that would help, you know, the small business owners out there that are looking to do business with the government.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds great.
Awesome. So it's been a few months. Tell us what you've been up to lately.
I've been working a lot with small businesses, innovative small companies, doing some really amazing things,
Mhm.
getting them involved with government contracting, securing government funding, project funding. And I'm actually participating as a mentor in a program run by the National Security Innovation Network called the Foundry with FedTech. So that's really fun too.
Oh, that's awesome. No, that's great. That's a good, and we can maybe leave some links if you want in the show notes so people can find you either on your website or learn more about Foundry if you'd
Yeah.
like. So no, that's really exciting. And I love doing that too. So I've worked with SCORE and some other like mentorship programs, and it's nice to, you know, help, especially kind of the businesses that are just getting started and give them an accurate outlook of what government contracting means and the type of work that you need to put into it, you know, and it can be very valuable. And it could be, you know, in some cases, some businesses focus exclusively on selling to the government. But yeah, no, it is nice to talk to them and give them a little bit of insight. So we talked last episode almost exclusively about OTA, Other Transaction Authority. And again, we had a conversation before this, and I was talking to you about how, you know, some of the people I were talking to in the government side were seeing OTA maybe slow down a little bit. Do you have any thoughts on that, where OTA is right now and kind of what you're seeing?
Yeah, it's really interesting. During 2020, especially, we saw OTAs being utilized really heavily for development of COVID vaccines and supplies and equipment, and that was a heavy spend, especially in 2020. But what's interesting is looking at 2021, the spend was not as high on COVID related OTA acquisitions. So it wasn't quite as steep of an incline as I think most people were expecting it to be.
Mm-hmm.
It actually went just unrelated to COVID. OTA obligations went from 7.6 billion in 2019 to 8.6 billion the year after, and 11.5 billion in 2021. But COVID related OTs were 7.7 billion in 2020 and 3.1 billion last year. So pretty steep decline in the things that were acquired for COVID related reasons. But
Interesting.
that's probably going to be expected and hopefully a good thing. And it means that we're dealing with it effectively, right?
Well, exactly. So, I mean, that might actually indicate not a lack of interest in using OTAs, but more of especially with the COVID piece, hey, maybe we're, like you said, wrapping around this problem and kind of developing the solutions. Yeah, and I would expect that to decline specific to COVID too. I hope it keeps on the decline. Let's just recage everybody on what OTA is and why the government uses it and why you might be interested in at least understanding that purchasing method as a small business owner.
Sure. Absolutely. So OTA stands for Other Transaction Authority, and it's a non-FAR-based acquisition mechanism. So it's not bound by the traditional federal acquisition regulation rules that are typically pretty cumbersome for small businesses. It's got a lot of incentives for small business utilization as well, in that it's got cost share requirements for large businesses that if they choose not to use a small business, they have to pay a third of the cost of the project up front. And it's known for having benefits for small businesses in the way of, communication, openness, and transparency with the government. In some cases, there's funding benefits that you can, get milestone payments up front and get going. So it's a lot more flexible acquisition method for government contractors to use, and it's definitely appealing for the low barriers to entry that it has for small business.
Sure. No, I think that was a good recap. I haven't researched it in a while, but I'm pretty sure it started with NASA during the space race back in the 60s. And just for the reasons that you said, hey, even back then, the traditional government contracting process was long, right? Long and cumbersome. And we were trying to do things fast. And at that time, beat the Russians to space. And so that's when OTA, from my understanding, came into being. And definitely correct me if I'm wrong. And then since then, it's kind of expanded. And from what I understand, the past 10, 20 years really started being used by some of the other agencies. I know I keep seeing it, all the time. And it's certainly a faster way for the government to do business. Not well understood. I could tell you, I talked to, I'm on the phone with contracting officers and program managers and guys I used to work with every day. And I can remember one OTA conversation with the contracting officer who was like at the top of his game, like retired, like full bird colonel, like commander many times over. And it's like, look, I know OTA, I know what it is, but I barely understand what it is. So I think it's a good point for small business owners to know that, a lot of times, and you've seen this, Chelsea, when you're working with a PM or a contracting officer with the government, sometimes it's your job to explain to them the best way forward, right? Sometimes in a very polite and respectful way, if you can do their job for them and lay out a contracting path, that is a great way to win multiple contracts with the government.
And really, that's what we call customer education, and where you have the opportunity to talk with your customer about the options that they have for contracting with you. Being knowledgeable in the avenues that you can take, that they can take, is going to help you regardless of if they already know all about it, or if they don't. You've got the opportunity to go in there and give them a sense as to, okay, this is how you can work with me, this is how it can be easy to work with me.
Sure.
And there's it's all by the book. There's nothing breaking the rules here and using OTs. So it's definitely a customer education experience for a lot of companies.
Yep, totally agree with you. And I would add, we won't get into it here, but you can add, in addition to giving them contracting options, you can take it a step further and find funding options for the program manager that you're working with, or the acquisitions team on the other side. But sticking with OTA, so you mentioned small business. What do you know about large businesses and OTAs? Are large businesses using these OTAs, and kind of, are they breaking the rules if they are? What's going on there?
They are. So there's, I think, probably all of the big primes are on all of the OT consortia, and it's just a matter of, well, it's an easy, small pay to play, membership. And in a lot of cases, the small business incentive to actually have additional small business or significant participation by a small business on the project is compelling enough. The cost share is compelling enough to have them bring on small business as a teammate. In some cases, not a whole lot, but in some cases, they're actually just eating the cost share and paying a third of it up front themselves. And in that case, it's, those are bigger projects, and, they're probably getting close to 20, 25 million and up.
Sure.
So those are bigger things that I think we typically see, the large companies that can eat the resources, they do. And in some cases, it's just a decision of, well, if the opportunity is big enough, and in other cases, it's, well, we just don't want to divide the pie anymore with a small business.
Well, talk to me a little bit more about that. So what the consort, let's start with the consort. I keep pronouncing it incorrectly, I'm sure. I keep calling them consortium. You're saying consortia. It's probably consortia. So can you explain what that is? So people listening can kind of recage and understand how the OTA kind of works and where they may engage with that process.
Sure. So there's really two kinds of OTs. There's direct award other transactions, and I see a lot of those come out of the Defense Innovation Unit. Mm-hmm. And those will be awarded to a specific company for the development of a specific prototype. And that typically will sometimes go into production, other times not, but generally, that's mostly out of DIU is where I'm seeing that. Consortia come in is there's really a middleman. And that middleman is the consortium management firm. And they are the ones that are responsible for, keeping the government accountable and keeping the government responsible for, holding up their end of the agreement, as well as bringing, the businesses that are in the consortia to the table to have discussions about, okay, what it is that, significant participation really means. And, having these discussions with the government and being able to get to the table with the government. They really bring the two parties together and facilitate a lot of that discussion and work.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And by the way, anyone listening, just because you mentioned DIU, if you go back and listen to my interview with David Rothside, probably a major at the time, but did a lot of great work with DIU, putting companies on contract. And that was a really interesting interview if you want to learn more about DIU and how they do business. So back to the consortia. So you mentioned small pay to play, right? So a small business could potentially join one of these consortiums, right? That they're managed by a company that the government has hired, correct?
Yeah. And so the government has contracted with the consortium management firm. And essentially, most of them have a fee ranging from $250 to maybe $500 a year. And that's just sort of an annual membership dues. More and more, a lot of these consortiums will actually put out their opportunities so that you can see what you're getting into. So you can, really determine if it's a good decision, if it's well aligned with what you're going for. And that's really been helpful for small businesses looking to join the right consortiums.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a good way to, there's the sam.govs out there, right? Like, so all the opportunities, and a lot of the companies are probably familiar with registering and maybe looking for things there. Hopefully they've listened to the podcast and they move to more of a paid tool to help them find stuff like that. But with these consortium memberships, like you're saying, you can join, and this is another kind of pot of opportunity for you to take a look at. And there are a lot of large companies that are also in these consortiums. So when they're engaging, typically you have to be part of the consortium to engage on these opportunities. You mentioned 1/3 cost share, right? So I'm kind of diving in a little bit deeper. So for the small guys, does that mean that if a large company goes after one of these opportunities, that they have to have a small business with them in order to engage?
In order to avoid that third cost share. So in order to avoid that cost share, they definitely have to have a small business as a significant part of that project.
Roger that. So they have to pay there's a fee that they have to pay, and that's the cost share you're talking about if they want to go in alone.
Yeah.
So actually you have a consultant over there that's giving you some information.
Yes. He's I'm getting lines fed from my assistant over here with Furry Paws.
That is fantastic. Yes. I have that. I have the same assistant helping me out as well. So very cool. So, I mean, I think that gives people an idea of, how they can engage with OTAs and like how the big companies are playing. And are you seeing the bigger companies kind of taking over? Or are you still seeing a good amount of that work going to the smaller businesses?
I've actually seen a good amount of the work going to small businesses. A lot of what I'm seeing is large companies sort of evaluating the small business pools in some of these OT consortia to really assess future acquisitions and, determining, okay, is that a skill set that we need to bring in-house? And is that something that we might want to look at setting up as a program internally and, bring them on, work with them as a team member and hopefully eventually maybe buy them, which is really interesting. It sort of opened up a new pathway for large businesses to really sort of bring new tech loads into their baseline with small business participation. And it really allows the small business to get some amazing past performance and some really great information to go to the government with and to be more knowledgeable with your customers. So, you can go and say, hey, I worked with Lockheed on this project. And, it's like that gives you a little bit of a resume booster. So it's definitely not a bad thing.
No, absolutely. No, that's incredible experience. And to be able to, I think one thing that's interesting is the timeline for award using OTAs. Some of the consortiums are, 60, 90 days, award times, which in the government contracting world is amazing, especially for larger contracts, although you can see kind of 30-day awards if you're already on contract, for a delivery order or something. If you're talking about a brand new contract, usually there's a significant timeline associated with that. So that's
Yeah.
another huge benefit, I think, with the OTAs. Could you maybe give maybe an example of one for some people to check out, just so they kind of get an idea of what you're talking about?
Sure. So I think probably a good one might be the hypersonics, or ATI manages most, well, not most, but several consortiums. And they have an awesome list and an awesome explanation of what all the technology focus areas are for their consortia.
Mhm.
And I think something you mentioned earlier is pretty important. When you said it's a different pot of opportunities from SAM, it really is, because the OTA RPPs, in most cases, request for prototype proposals, those aren't released on SAM. So most companies aren't going to be able to find those via the traditional, look and find it and respond
Sure.
avenues. So having a foot sort of in that game is
Mhm.
is helpful to stay up to date on information. And with it being technology focus area based, it gives small businesses an opportunity to really land right where they know that their customers and that their target team members are going to be.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, even if you did find it, on one of the normal public systems, if they put something out there, you still got to be a member of the consortium usually to engage on it. So you're still going to end
Yeah.
up having to go back there and find information. No, I agree. And actually, after talking with you last time, I certainly went out and started exploring those, and I think that there is a lot of very useful information with some of those different consortium. SOSEC's another one that's pretty good. But I mean, I think it depends too on who you're targeting. And so you can kind of look through the different consortiums out there and see, who's working with the clients that you're either working with or you want to work with. And that can help as well. No, that's fantastic. If you want to pivot off of OTAs, a hard pivot, we could talk a little bit about, because we start getting into conferences and things opening back up. Love to hear what you're seeing as far as conferences, getting back out there in the real world and doing business. And then, maybe we could take it to, hey, what can, and I know large businesses listen to this too, but for the small business guys, like what should you really be expecting? What could you or should you be making part of your business development process as far as kind of meeting people in person? How important is that?
Absolutely. I was at ABSIA's West conference in February, and it was amazingly well attended. There was a ton of people there, and it really, I saw a lot of enthusiasm from the government people that were there, and the age was a little bit younger than it was, I think, pre-pandemic, and there was a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of energy, and people really appreciated being back sort of in a forum where they could, shake hands, grin and grip, kind of introduce and make relationships.
Yep.
So it's really an opportunity, and probably the best opportunity that small businesses really have to really make a good impression and to be present. Being at these conferences and events, even if you're not physically located there, your presence or your office isn't there. Being at these events gives you an opportunity to be face to face with these customers and upfront, and make a lasting impression. And that's really it's been hard to do that for a lot of companies throughout the pandemic. So pivoting back to that in person, I'm going to Suffolk, and I was amazed the one-on-ones, which they added extra days for, were sold out within 2 minutes of opening.
Oh, wow. That's
It was,
amazing.
yeah, it was really, really amazing. And so I think that they were a little bit maybe overwhelmed by the awesome turnout that they're getting, at least.
Mhm.
But I mean, that's great to see, right? It just shows that everyone's really enthusiastic and ready to get back at it, and ready to start, really providing the stuff our warfighters need.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree. I was at GeoInt last week or the week before. I don't know. I'm in a time zone maze here after traveling, but I think it was a week before. But when we're in May of 2022, if you're listening to this now, but yeah, I noticed the exact same thing. So complete difference in what we were seeing for attendance before. GeoInt was absolutely up and running. Everyone was there. No masks where I was. Everyone was talking and having the meetings like you described. And I would say that relationships is, if not the most important part of government sales, it's up there with the top three. And as a small business owner, that's where you're really going to get a lot of those leads and demonstrate what you have to potential clients. So yeah, and look, there are a lot of different types of conferences out there. Some are, so I would just warn some of the small business owners out there. Some companies will put conferences together and they're aimed at you. They're aimed at the small business owner. And so you might have at those a couple people from government speaking, but mainly industry attending. And again, and I'd love you to weigh in here because I know I have my opinion. Personally, I like to attend conferences that are targeted at either the government, and specifically the government organization I'm trying to sell to, or it's a blend of government and industry. So, because you really want that, I really want a high attendance rate by the government, which usually means, if it was with the Air Force, and I've talked about this in previous podcasts, like ATA last year, it's targeted at kind of the mobility Air Force guys. So you have a huge population of them attending meetings and trainings all day. But you also have an industry floor where you can buy a booth relatively inexpensively for what you get out of it. And now you can show, you've got users, you've got some acquisitions folks, you've got requirements people. So the different people you need to make a deal happen are all going to be there looking at your product, and you can demonstrate to them. It really has and then you're walking away with a bunch of leads and from the conversations, use cases that you may not have considered for your product or service before.
Absolutely. I think really making sure that you're aligning your events with what, your goals are is critically important. I see a lot of companies that are, oh, well, we've got a list of, every conference to attend, for the rest of the year. We're going to go be at every single one of them. And, some of them are dramatically clearly wrong for them. So it's like, you might want to focus on your specific industry niche. And oftentimes I will say that government folks are pretty strictly limited or pretty strictly going to events that are put on by nonprofit organizations. So, the NDIAs and the AFCEAs and, the organizations that are not there to make money off of them is kind of a key for them. So making sure that you're, aware of those industry groups that your government customers are a part of, that they, participate in, that they weigh in on, that they speak at.
Sure.
And yeah, attending those events is definitely, it's critically important. And I would say, having been cooped up and having had all of these small businesses kind of stuck at home for so long, it's really important if you want to get your name out there and if you want to really grow and succeed in the federal market, to go and be there and have a presence and make sure you're showing your capabilities.
Absolutely. And even at a larger level, if you're smaller, you're going there and you're trying to match mission requirements with what you're providing as a solution and looking for contract options and leads and whatnot. But as you start gaining momentum, like you said, you can see it in some of the bigger companies there, right? As they're investing a lot of money in their booths and their presence, because there's that aspect of it too, like letting the government know, hey, we're here and we're doing great. And I know at GeoInt, it was interesting because there were a couple of companies that weren't there last year, and the talk of the town was, hey, maybe they're folding, or maybe they're not doing as well. I noticed they were back here and their booths were double the size, and they were trying to change that a little bit. So there's at the higher level, there's definitely a lot of that going on as well. What do you think as far as conferences are great? Absolutely a great place to build relationships. And by the way, AFCEA, just to give them a plug too, I agree. I think AFCEA is one of the best. And they have a lot of great virtual things too. And one difference I would say is if you do something like, for instance, I attended New Horizons. Are you familiar with New Horizons?
Yeah.
I did the New Horizons, which is basically I always say it's focused on Hanscom, at least the one up here, the Northeastern version, right? But that was all virtual, but still worth attending for a small business, because what you get is all of the PEOs were there with their material leaders, and they're giving presentations on these. This is what we're working on. And by the way, this is where we need business help. This is where we need small business help. This is where we need large business help. This is how we're putting people on contract. Here are your contacts. And I mean, for a company that's really trying to figure out what's coming up and what their customer is looking for, I can't think of anything better than that for, determining some of that.
Oh yeah. I mean, finding out priorities is that's the best forum to do it, because that's where they're talking about it. They're talking about where they want to go, what they need to do to get there, what they need and resources to get there, and what sort of support they need from industry to get there. And it's really one of the best forums that I've ever experienced for really getting to know your government customers,
Yeah.
and getting in front of new government customers. And even large businesses, I see them making huge announcements at things like this. I think HII made, Sierra Space made a huge announcement about their transformation. And I think it was, there's just a lot of opportunity for small businesses to make an impression on such a big number of people, that turning that opportunity down because it's, oh, well, we don't have anything to sell, or, oh, we don't have anything to say, is, get out there and introduce yourself to people. They want to know that you're there. And the only way to show them that is, well, by being there and showing up.
Absolutely. And how many times have you heard from one of your clients that, hey, I've got some contacts, but they're not, I'm reaching out in the government. They're not returning my calls. They're not returning their emails. If you attend a conference with the government and you make the connection there, or even something virtual, right, where somebody's presenting something, and I've had this happen to me, I don't even know how many times at this point, right, where, because a lot of times they're providing all of the contacts for all the speakers and everybody else. If you reach out to somebody that presented on a topic that you're interested in submitting on, that you attended the conference with, and you reach out to them, that person, especially, and I can speak from the military, especially if you're talking about a military person or a GS, government civilian that's working for the Department of Defense in some aspect, they have not just an incentive, it's a direction or a directive to respond to you. I mean, they're there. If you're reaching out to them, I can almost guarantee that if their name was given as a POC at that conference and you send them an email saying, hey, and not a sales email, but hey, I attended the conference that you were at. You were speaking to X, and we have a capability that solves that. I would just like to learn more, or maybe you can point me in the right direction of who I could potentially set up a demo for. You're going to get a response of some sort when you do that. Versus, you've got people out there kind of charlatans selling lists of government email addresses, and if you fall into that trap, I'm sure you're not going to get any response, and you shouldn't, because you're spamming the government. And so you got to put a little work in. But I think, this is the way to do it.
And I think that touches on a real key point in the follow-up. After West, there was definitely a couple of companies where I got calls from them, and they didn't even know what I did or what my company was. They were just
Right.
like, I got your name because I scanned your badge. Here's like what I'm going to try to sell you now. And it was like immediately unappealing, and immediately like, oh, okay, you didn't try to bring my memory back of how we met, what our conversation was, that you were listening to what I said. None of that.
Yep.
I mean, it was just very, very interesting to see the successes and failures of the follow-up from that conference, especially.
Absolutely. And for those listening that haven't attended a conference recently, typically you'll wear a badge. So instead of having to hand out business cards, a lot of them will tell you not to exchange contact information, but you might get a scanner on your phone, and you'll just scan someone's badge. And, at the end of the conference, usually the conference organizer will send you a list of all the contacts. And I don't know how many times my badge has been scanned, and I know exactly what you're talking about. So, just a tip for people, what I do if I'm talking with somebody that I intend on following up with is I always walk around with a notebook and I'm taking notes. So if I'm reaching out to somebody, it's not, hey, it's like, with no information that kind of explaining the call. It's, hey, we talked about this topic and how we can engage, what are the next steps, yada, yada. So no, that's great. What do you think beyond conferences? What are some great ways to create these relationships?
I feel like there's a lot of people that are just kind of afraid to pick up the phone and call and do cold calling. I mean, it may be kind of cold, but ideally you're going to, ask a current government customer or a potential government customer if they've got folks that they might recommend that you talk to, or users that you might recommend that they talk to.
Yeah.
And they're always willing to make a referral and they like to talk on the phone. Like, they like to be treated as people. Mm-hmm. It's just it's when it really gets into icky waters is, when you start spamming and just calling and saying, oh, hey, we're going to provide you this product that has nothing to do with what your focus is or nothing to do with what what your job is. And oh, by the way, we didn't do any research about your organization either. So, hey, you need some toilet paper? Like,
yep. That was always a fun conversation for me. When I say fun, I mean completely irritating on the government side. So running a branch, I would get requests for meetings all the time. And, you do have to be selective about, as a government person, who you're taking meetings with. And I think just recognizing that the people on the other side of the table from you have an insane amount of workload as far as getting the job done. I mean, their job is to execute the mission. And whether they're a program manager, a contracting officer, or user requirements, they're executing a mission of some sort. And, taking time out of their day to meet with you, if they're going to do that, you have got to do the work ahead of time and not be wasting their time. And everybody doesn't do that. Now, most, I think, government people that have been around for a while are savvy enough to determine whether or not, there's any, link there. And a lot of that has to do with what you're saying, which is, how you're engaging with them and, letting them know that, hey, I understand your mission. And I think that, and I understand your problem sets. And I also understand that I may have something that can make your life a little bit easier. And, let's schedule 30 minutes or an hour to demonstrate something. And you might not be the right person for that. They might have to push you somewhere else. So that works too. No, that's awesome. I think that's, in cold calling, nobody really likes to do that. I shouldn't say nobody. There's some people that I think are sadistic and enjoy doing that, but you're right. You're doing something a little bit different, right? You're not spamming someone and reaching out. And I think that's just a good marketing principle right there. So your business, aside from OTAs and maybe including OTAs, let's talk a little bit about how you help small businesses and, who's the perfect client to kind of reach out to you if they're listening to this. Where can you help them?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I work a lot with companies throughout the spectrum, but most of my clients are small businesses. Companies that have had a couple of contracts under their belt that are really looking to maximize their presence in the federal space. I have a couple of companies that, have really worked well with a few agencies only once, and they really want to develop some working relationships and some long-term relationships with those customers. Companies that are really interested in getting their foot in the door by subbing and working with some of the large primes. Those are definitely some of my clients as well. So building out teaming relationships and developing relationships with prime contractors, or being a prime contractor and being comfortable in that role and building a team to support your bid. Those are all things that I'm doing on a regular basis. Working in SBIR land or working in program funding, it's sort of an interesting and always challenging crossover to find the right people with the money, with the requirement, in the right office at the right time. You got to call them at the right time.
No, very cool. And it's hard for small businesses to find the right people to help them with that. So you're certainly somebody that they can engage with. And speaking of which, what is the best way to engage with you? How can they find you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. My company is Collaborative Compositions. My name is Chelsea Meggit. And you can also find me at collaborativecompositions.com.
Copy all. All right. So I'm going to put that in the notes, at least a link to your LinkedIn profile and your website. So anybody listening, if you want to reach out to Chelsea, now you know how to do it. Feel free to also send me an email if you want me to put you in touch with her if you don't get out there directly. Chelsea, as usual, this has been awesome. Thank you for coming back on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much, Richard. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks.